Euzubillahimineşşeytanirracim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Rabbi şrah li sadri ve yessir li emri ve lisani yefkahu kavli. Selamünaleyküm ve rahmetullahi ve berekatuhu. Inshallah, we will continue with the third branch of the 24th word. Last week we finished the first principle, and inshallah we will continue from the second principle. The third branch is about the principles of reading narrations from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
So we can continue by reading the second principle, inshallah. Second principle: there are various levels in the matters of Islam. There are various levels in the matters of Islam. If one requires certain proof, for another the prevailing opinion is sufficient. If one level requires a certain proof, for another level the prevailing opinion is sufficient. Not exactly.
I think it's like a person. If for a person, he requires, that's how I see it.
Oh, one as an individual.
Yeah.
But for another.
I don't know, you can also read as level.
Okay.
Okay, I see. I mean, if we read it as individuals, it could be saying, while one person may require a certain proof, for another person, that proof may be just the prevailing of opinion on that matter. Yeah. Whereas if we're talking about levels, a certain level may require proof, whereas for another level, that proof may come in the form of a consensus on it. All right, okay. Others require merely assent. I think it's about levels, actually. Others require merely assent and acceptance and not to be rejected. So in these levels, there may be some that require proofs, however we want to understand a proof to be. Others, it might be sufficient for there just to be a consensus on it amongst, let's say, individuals. Other levels, you can just accept it on the basis of not rejecting it, almost not finding it disagreeable rather than actively finding it agreeable. In which case, secondary matters or particular events in time, which are not among the bases of belief, do not require certain compliance and definite proof. So secondary matters or particular events in time which are not among the bases of belief, let's say fundamental belief, do not require certain compliance and definite proof, just not to be rejected and to be submitted to, and not to be interfered with. So there may be certain aspects, certain points that, let's say, I do not find a explicit proof for, but as long as it's not amongst the base of belief or fundamental of belief, it's sufficient for me to just not reject it, or just not to actively go against it. I guess that's what it's saying, amongst these various levels. I guess one has to then ask, what are the bases of belief so that I know which ones, and I mean, there's a sort of presumption, I guess, of not necessarily bad, negative presumption, but a certain acceptance of the idea that I want to comply to begin with whatever Islam is, and did not go against whatever it necessitates. So it feels a little externalized the way that I'm understanding it right now. But I guess not to dwell too much upon it unless you guys want to. If we're talking, I mean, it's principle, right? So in the larger context of hadith, larger context of this third branch, if we're talking about principles of reading and principles of approaching hadith, I can talk about, let's say, certain hadith that may require proof, certain hadith that is enough for me to understand in terms of there being a general notion of what it means, as accepted by others. And there may be certain hadith that I cannot explicitly make sense of, but as long as I don't say this is wrong or there's falsehood in this, in terms of content, that can be a way of me, the various options that I have in approaching. I mean, this is kind of what I'm understanding from this second principle. I don't know if others have different takes. It's also very short. Yeah, please.
In general, this is interesting in the sense that overall, just looking at it from afar, it says not all the matters of Islam require the same level of certainty. Well, what does that mean?
Where does it say that?
So the
Oh, like that's what you're saying in general.
overall,
Okay.
yeah, because he says if some of the matters require certainty, some of them requires not to reject, some
Right.
of them. So
Yeah.
there are different levels. Because if I check myself, for instance, I might have a tendency to come up with same level of detail and certainty for every single matter. I might be seeking for such a thing.
Yeah.
Is this to be sought for, first of all? I mean, not to say that there shouldn't be any sort of explanation or certainty, because the author says there are various levels of it, rather than saying that every single one of them has to be, you have to be equally certain. Or not sure if the right word is certain, but
Accept them all on the basis of the same.
same strength, maybe I should say, I don't know. Because what quickly comes to my mind, I'm not sure if it would be under this title, but let's say for the necessary existence of a creator, I feel like, yeah, I have to be so secure and sure about this, about prophethood. Now I'm thinking about angels, for instance. Again, it's a fundamental matter of belief. But, or jinns, as we have been discussing it on Wednesday. So what would I accept as certainty when it comes to such a matter? Because would I expect to, let's say, if you tell me, is this flower over there existing? Through my eyes, I know it, right? Is Birkan here? I saw him.
There are different ways to reach certainty.
Yeah, but if I hear his voice only, would I be as certain as seeing him? Depends. I mean, if he is a person that is invisible, then at best I can hear him, for instance. But if I force that, no, he has to be seen by me, otherwise I wouldn't accept his existence, let's say, then maybe I am forcing myself for something that's not possible anyways. Like for the case of angels, if I say that unless I see with my eyes, I would not accept, because my eyes are my most certain source of conclusion, maybe it will not work in this case. But again, belief in angels is some of the fundamentals of beliefs, must be so central. The author says even there are some other matters within Islam, he says, not necessarily pertaining to belief actually, because at the second sentence in which case secondary matters or particular events in time which are not among the basis of belief do not require certain compliance and definite proof. So something that is secondary, whatever secondary we can understand, because it looks like in this context it's about some narrations like end of times, whatever. And he says, for these, the level of certainty that you need does not have to be as certain as does God exist or not. But again, while reading this, we can read it as putting a check mark, such as, I don't want to burn in hell. So what is the minimum requirement for me to accept something so that when I get in front of the bridge, they wouldn't throw me into the fire? Let's not read it as such, but rather what I should be expecting as level of certainty for certain matters of belief. Because if I say that unless I reach that level, that high level, I wouldn't call it I wouldn't accept myself as satisfied. But what if such a thing is never attainable from human point of view? Then if it's not attainable for any human or average human, yet I put it as my threshold and say that if it's not there, then I will deny it. Because this is what he said initially. He said some of the scholars whose belief was weak but whose egotism was strong have gone as far as denying them. Because it looks like those scholars, this is from right before first principle, there might be some people who say that my intellect is not able to grasp this, or the author says their belief is weak, so it looks like there's an interplay of belief versus ego in there. So definitely because of this, such a scholar might be me putting a threshold which maybe is not going to satisfy anything. So the author is now questioning that threshold over there, as far as I understand.
What's at stake if a scholar or if I say this hadith is false and weak while I accept others? I mean, feels a little arbitrary.
So I feel like I am closing the door to benefit from this point of view, because I'm saying that if it is below this threshold, I'll just discard it. It's a lie, or it is just nonsensical. I'm not even going to give a second thought what this might mean, because I'm just discarding it categorically, saying that don't look at it. Why waste your time with this word? It's just maybe Abdurrahman's word. So, I mean, not for you. So then I am closing door to prophetic message like this in general. It might be certain parts of it, or because this is easily extrapolatable, people go to the extreme of saying that, well, it looks like there are a few of them which make sense, or some of them says, well, none of them makes sense, or might say that, well, this was 14th century, so whatever. But the prophetic message then becomes dismissed altogether, or you open the door to that extreme.
Which deprives, ultimately, of course, yourself, but potentially others, of practical guidance that they can live with, that connects them to their creator in their everyday actions.
Because in the second branch, he was, I mean, the way I understand, he was talking about how Prophet is in a balanced way presenting the divine names and teaching me how to, in a balanced way, again, read divine names. And if I close door for myself to that balance, and I say that I don't need that training as if, then I am by myself left with the, what was it? Droplet, path of droplet in the second branch, in which he was saying that he uses his own intellect plus the philosophers or the intellect of mankind, and at best he can climb to the moon. This was the metaphor in the second one. So if I trust too much to my own capacity and set the threshold as such and say that, set the threshold and then say, anything below this I will not consider. By which indicating or implying that I am not interested in trying to understand what might be out there, and I deprive myself of this way of thinking.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me. But it also makes me wonder, and maybe you guys discussed this last week, why in the first paragraph under the third branch he says scholars who rely on their reason. And when I deal with hadith, what else can I really rely on besides reason? I mean, it seems like even these principles are encompassed under general reason. And yeah, I understand that what's at stake is making sure that I don't deprive myself of a certain path, right? But I mean, should I not at all then consider the potentiality of there being questionable, hadith, or do I just completely close that door and even if it's, let's say, unbeknownst to me, not true, try to see what I can grasp from it in general? Maybe that's the way to go.
So I guess in here, so he in that paragraph, the introductory paragraph, he talks about as if two stages, two different types. One type of scholar which relies on his intellect, like in the original language, it's more like he is so sure about his intellect, aklına güvenen. Like he says, my intellect can crack this problem anyways. So this sort of a self-confidence in there. The second type is weaker belief, stronger egotism. So as if the author is saying that, what is it that makes people question narrations? So is it that, is it some technical problem that makes them question it? Or is it like this line of chain?
Okay.
So some like technical in the sense of technicals of narration or hadith literature. Is it something like this, saying that, okay, this scholar might have some issues, this or that? Or is it a thing because the scholar himself is overly relying on his intellect? Not to say that, because at another writing of Nursi.
What's overly relying?
So in another writing of Nursi, the first sentence actually, he starts the book is, if intellect and narration contradicts, intellect is taken as basis and narration is interpreted, but the intellect needs to be intellect. So he says, definitely according to him, there seems to be some corrupted or distorted version of intellect, which you wouldn't like to allow freely to distort, or like in case of trying to interpret the hadith or any sort of narration, because Quran is also, we can take it as coming down generations through narration. Like, okay, it was written, it's much more solid, much more solid than any other text, historical text. But still you can say that, well, this verse looks like it says God has a hand. So what are you going to do with this, right? Yeah. So the author says, yes, it must be interpreted. You cannot literally take text, he says. But in order for the text to be interpreted, the intellect needs to be trained, sort of. But for example, let's take ourselves. We all went through a certain way of training for our intellects, like a Western, secular, naturalist worldview. And we got through this way of training to learn how to think. Because this is what university is teaching us, right? How to think, how to reason, how to make sense of things. So that way of perspective is what we have right now. So, but it has some basic assumptions. everything consists of matter, for instance. Anything beyond matter is not worthy to be evaluated from that point of view. Because if you cannot put anything into the laboratory, hardcore science is just treated as if it doesn't exist. So this is my intellect right now. So shall I use this intellect without treating it further, without training it further? Is this intellect a proper tool for interpreting narration which contradicts intellect? So this is why at the beginning of that book of his, it is in the old Said era of author, so one of his earliest writings says that the intellect needs to be intellect. So this is why I think when he says in here, scholars that rely on their intellect and doesn't take into account that what if my line of thought is flawed? So let me also question my line of reasoning, because maybe I am trained in a certain worldview which categorically rejects what can be extracted or what this text might mean. But the point that I would like to make in here is, author is not someone who says, don't interpret, don't reason or anything, because this is how his other book starts with. But just questioning, what sort of an intellect do you have?
So in his understanding, that intellect would be one that when you try and assess it, it takes into account the worldview and premises upon which you're approaching something, and tries to consider the alternative. Yes,
and intellect, I would also say, under the guidance of second branch, an intellect which is aware of its limitations, because in the second path, like the droplet, the philosopher was relying on his knowledge. He was like a wise philosopher. So the intellect is at the core of it, and this is what the philosopher relies on. But in the third one, the particle, the atom, was aware of his neediness, his poverty, saying that, yes, I do have this intellect, this is a beautiful tool given to me, but I am also aware of my neediness. Like you all heard those supplications, that dua, Allahumma arina al-haqqa haqqan warzuqna ittiba'ahu. So what does it mean? Oh my God, show me right as right, and bless me or grant me risk, like sustain me with obeying it. So, which means if I'm truly saying this, I am aware that although I have this tool, the intellect, to distinguish right from wrong, I don't really know how to utilize such a tool. And this is why Quran is Furqan, for example. Quran is saying that this is a book to teach you how to distinguish right from wrong. Philosopher says, I don't need revelation for that. Or that mindset, the mindset that exclusively relies on intellect, says that I know how to distinguish right from wrong. I don't need you to teach it to me.
Right. That's very helpful, and just makes me think that, not to belabor the point, but it's interesting that he says scholars, because like it makes you think that these are scholars, as in scholars of hadith or Muslim, or like people who would be sort of cognizant of a certain worldview that they're encompassed in. So it's much less even about what worldview am I coming with, but am I, as you were saying in terms of the Adam, in awareness of what I am in need of, and kind of approaching it in this sort of humanly holistic way. But thank you. That was,
maybe one more thing, and especially as we
you can have a lot more things.
As we come to later ages, nowadays, if you look at, I haven't read too much, but the scholars that I read, except Mercy, are more like taking quote-unquote scientific knowledge for granted. For instance, look at the last 200 years or 100 years or any popular scholar out there in America. Nobody have the courage or maybe need to question any scientific truth. Expect in that mindset. So what is trying to be done? Quran is also saying the same thing. So as if the basis, the ground truth is science and deeply explaining everything, Quran is in a shallow way just giving some hint to claim, to train, like some magnificent findings of society, secular society. Quran is hinting it. I mean, if this is the point, they found it, they made it, just hinting it, what's the point? It doesn't mean anything, right? But this is the mindset nowadays. So it is being taken as the ground truth, and we are just trying to justify religion because this is how we identify ourselves. And we just say that, oh, but 14 centuries ago, saying such a thing is big. I mean, if it was for a human, it would be big. But this is speech of God. It's not, why are you comparing two things which are uncomparable? Because speech of God by definition should be absolute. But you are comparing it to some knowledge of human, which is like train, plane, whatever. So we have this mindset. And nowadays, because the author actually at some point in another of his writings, he is asked, why did you change your approach? Some asker asks this question. In old ages, you were like general Muslim scholars, which were taking Western knowledge, or sciences, and trying to prove religion with it. But it looks like you totally changed your way. And his response is, because me, he says, back in the day, and also the majority of Muslim scholars take sciences as something so solid and as if they think that science is so deep. But he says, I realize this is not the case. Actually, as if the scientific knowledge that they call is so shallow of a water. But he says, scripture is so deep that, I mean, it's not that you are going to support religion with science, but just vice versa. Science, religion is going to explain the existence to you. It's not like the solid one is science and the religion is about to collapse. So you put like a support from religion, from science. Since this is our mindset nowadays also, we are now more on the side of relying on intellect rather than saying that my intellect is needed to be trained by messenger and scripture. And then submissively sit in front of messenger and scripture. Submissively meaning you are submissively, I am submissively getting into those PhD programs. Whatever my advisor says, because my assumption is this guy knows it. And wherever the person is going to ask me to dig, I will go and try to dig. There's this trust relationship between you and your advisor, right? So there's the submission, for example, in there. Or I think like, this university is a good one. I can dedicate my next 6 years, 5 years in this university. There's some sort of a submission, some expectation. Do I have the same expectation and submission to revelation? I mean, with the same certainty, do you feel like I'm going to study this Quran and it's going to make me reach to that certainty? This is the difference, I guess, between the two approaches in the previous section, like the droplet versus atom. And the scholars that he mentions in here, I think, are more like droplet, but not atom, like the ones that rely on their intellect. But the rest of the text has nothing to do with saying that accept and go. It's not like this, but he is expanding and trying to, I guess, train my intellect. What should I expect as right or wrong?
And if I find myself at the point where I find a hadith that, an authentic hadith that I cannot seem to grasp or understand, there's no harm, there's no need for me to reject it, right? Just because I don't understand it, I can put it aside and say, all right, well, maybe I'm not ready to understand, or I don't have the understanding to get what this hadith is about. Maybe I can't act upon it or understand it. Maybe, it could still be true in its own sense.
I can shelf it. I don't necessarily, as it says, have to outright reject it, as long as it's not concerned with what I accept to be fundamental belief matters. Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense because of your comments, and especially I guess even though like it's very applicable to our time as well, but when I think about contemporaries of this author, or just in general the early modern period, and like this onslaught of the attempt to synthesize scientific understanding with scripture, I can see how the misuse of intellect steers in that sense. Real Birkan, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. So the way I understand the text is a little bit different, not in the sense like I don't, it's not that I do not agree with whatever said so far, but it's more like, so when I read the text, I guess the crux of the text is not about the battle between different worldviews. And when we take this attitude, trying to understand such a text in which, we are in the middle of battle, so we have to be careful with everything we say or everything we do, otherwise we lose to other side. When we take such an attitude, I think we are missing some important parts. It's actually like very simple parts, but I guess important parts. And when I try to read the text without such an attitude, like with the attitude that I have to prove something to others, or I have to show that what I do as a matters of, or what I study, the matters of Islam, as Otu says, that I have to prove to some other group or some other people, or even to myself, that what I study is respectful, what I study is the right one, the truth, whatever. So without this attitude, I guess the way I understand the text, the author is saying that, Birkan, when you live your life, the matters of Islam, like the way I understand is, when you live your life, and when you take revelation and narrations as your guide while living your life. So taking them as guide and trying to live my life, matters of Islam, the way I understand, is that he says there will be some stuff that you will see in your life that you experience, or from the narrations or from the scripture even, that you will encounter some parts that you won't understand with a clear certainty or with a high certainty. An author says, do not let them stop you. Do not let them stop you in your training, in your living your life. Do not stop you, because, do not let them stop you, because this is how you do with everything. Right? I study X, I study Y, or I try to understand X, I try to understand Y, whether guidance from scripture or narrations or from my friends, my wife, from my professor, doesn't matter. Sometimes some parts I understand, which are the crucial parts to let me take the steps, right? These crucial parts that I need to understand, that I have to find like establish a trust relationship, let's say. And then other than these crucial parts, there will be some other parts that you will not understand right now. But try to at least, see how they fit to the bigger picture. Even if you cannot see that, how they fit to the bigger picture, just realize or remember that with the crucial parts, with the real parts, that you understood and already have a trust relationship. So based on this, say that, okay, I don't understand right now. It doesn't make sense to me right now. But there's no reason for me to reject them either, because I don't have anything against them either. And I want to continue as well. And the real parts, the crucial parts that I need to continue, it's already with me. So I'm sorry, the parts that I don't understand, some of you, but I won't let you stop me because I need to go. So I guess when we talk about matters of Islam, our attitude is rather compared to the first attitude I mentioned, our attitude should be rather that I need to continue, otherwise, I will live a miserable life. And I don't want this. So there is no choice for me, as if, I'm sitting comfortably on my chair and contemplating on the matters. But even if I don't contemplate, I will continue living happily. This is not the case. I need guidance, whether from scriptures, from narrations, from my professors, from my wife, but I need guidance. And so far, the scripture and narration seems to be working for me the best way. So I don't want to lose this valuable source. An author says, you don't need to. Like everything else in your life, you don't need to stop. Just let them benefit you. I guess one good example would be like in a relationship with people, right? When we have this crucial understanding of the other one, that I trust him, I trust her. I understand her, I understand him. One day, he does something stupid. You don't just cut the relationship, right? You say, okay, I don't understand, but I know him. I'm sure there's a meaning out of it, or I'm sure there's a reason for that. I will understand it later, maybe. Or for now, I just, accept it as it is. I don't mind. Even this acceptance will help with the relationship getting better. So let's do it. So again, to summarize, I guess we don't need to, deny this as a human. I don't need to perfectly understand everything in my life, and this is not how I'm living. Yes, when I'm in a battle, I'm trying to prove something to someone or trying to prove something to myself. Yes, I have to be convinced about it. And I call such matters that I have to convince myself as the matters of fundamentals of the belief. This is how I call them. An author says, if they are fundamentals of the belief, yes, you need certainty. But for some other things in your life, you don't need such a certainty, do you? And as a reader, I say, yes, that's true, I don't need. So don't let such a things, auxiliary things, stop you. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you, Real Birkan, for that. Yeah, I mean, when you bring it down to that level of practical life, it definitely gains another dimension of meaning. And if I imagine myself as being on a path, there is this sort of necessity to keep going and to make sure that I don't get stuck in an exit. If I'm on the highway, that I don't end up in a ditch. That I'm in need of continuing on because I'm in need of guidance in a lot of different ways, as you said. So that makes sense to me. Thank you.
So, Birkan, yeah, I agree with what you say. That if I come across a hadith that I might not understand, it's lazy if I don't, try to understand it and challenge myself to derive the benefit from it that may be, derived from it. But, in the example that you made, you or us or the person relies on the trust of the narrations, that there is benefit in it, whether we understand it or not. And so if one does not possess that trust, right, that limits the benefit they can derive. And so this person, which may be none of us here but myself, we need to, develop that trust with the Quran and Sunnah first before we can fully start understanding Hadith for what they can give us.
Mohammed Saeed, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. Thanks for the comment. I think the point for me, the reflection of this part in my world is like, I need to be certain. I personally need to be certain in some part of the things, but there are other parts that I personally I am kind of provided by the others. The reason why I said this is that as if like it's a help from the others. I don't have to worry about some of the things. Yes, there is a personal responsibility on me, and I need to make it sure about my, this text is I think mainly about the names, how to communicate with the things in order to communicate with or how to take the things in order to communicate with the Creator. That's my need. I am in need of a certainty that I am in connection with an absolute source of existence in, as much as possible in each interaction, in each experience. That's on me, and because it's my need, and it cannot be provided in the way that like it cannot be. I cannot expect it to come to me from to come to me without me attending to have that communication. It's on me. But there are other ways, there are other things that I am provided for. For example, there are verses in the Quran. It talks about a proportion. This proportion will be, if you pass away, this proportion will be left to your kid. This much of proportion is gonna be left to your child, and this is going to be for your wife, such and such. I feel the overall, the general approach to these verses, especially these kind of matters, is like, why 3 but not 2? Why it's not equal to for each people? But the verse is ending with a message that, the point is to be connected with the giver of all. That's the point here. Not the proportion is the point, but the proportion is kind of given to me as like, you don't worry about to calculate. This is calculated for you. You need to focus on your responsibility that is going to be a saver for you, that you are going to be communicating with the absolute source of existence. That's your need, and that's that is something that you can only do it, or you are given this capacity and this need. But what happens is that it turns other way around, and that communication is taken for granted, and then we focus on the matters that we cannot really confirm or come to a certainty about. They become a matter of discussion, but the main need or fundamental may be missing. That's what I understood.
Thank you, Walid Said, for sharing that. And thank you for everyone for sharing your comments. If no one else has anything else to say, go ahead.
Just an example about this. So there's like a hadith. It's not about the end of times, but it was one of the hadith about the Prophet, peace be upon him. It was like a story where a narration where someone was eating with his left hand, and the Prophet sees it and tells him to eat it with his right hand. And he says, I can't. And the Prophet says, okay, then you won't be able to, or you won't. And then I don't know if this is part of the narration or if it's an interpretation, but it says like the person then has a stroke and then he's not able to then ever use that hand again. I'm just like wondering like what kind, I mean, that doesn't seem like a very nice thing to do, like to like just make someone, I don't know, especially the Prophet too, like, you know, his life, you know, like his mercy, how compassionate he was, like all his like things he's done. You're like, this narration doesn't seem to make sense. So this was always like a question mark for me. I was just like, no, I don't really believe in that. I just personally kind of rejected it. But like it was a question mark. And then I asked someone else later, and he said it's so simple actually. Like he tells the guy to eat with his left hand. The guy says, I can't. And the Prophet says, yes, because you don't try it, you won't be able to. Like you won't. And then the way I understood it is like probably the idea of the stroke or wherever I read that from, that might have been just an interpretation added along with it. But then a correct, let's say, intellect that looked at it would say that, yes, the Prophet said you won't be able to, and then because the person doesn't try to lift it, then he's not able to. Like, would it correct, so something previously which I didn't understand, which didn't make sense to me, might actually make sense to me, and there might actually be like wisdom in it, and things for me to get. That was just one example of something that I didn't understand, but later on it became more clear to me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, because I feel like, you know, it becomes kind of easy to talk about not rejecting or accepting and how we kind of need it. But when we think about some concrete examples, like there are a lot of strange hadith out there. Like I had heard that one too, and I hadn't really dwelled on it too much enough to be like, oh, I can't accept this. But you know, I'm sure there's others that, like, you know, especially ones that seem to take like a violent turn, like things that seem very against my expectation of what prophetic guidance would look like. So I think what, you know, your friend kind of said exemplifies a general method of approaching hadith, which is there are particular instances, but there has to be, if I'm reading it now, if there's to be guidance for me now, there has to be a sort of universality to it, from which I can extract a universality to that particular. So if it just ended up with the guy having a stroke, then it just becomes this kind of like uncomfortable incident that has nothing to do with me, and that makes me not very happy with there existing such a hadith. So I guess part of my responsibility falls down to making sure that I accept the interpretation that makes it so that it is somehow relevant, useful, and not in contradiction with myself or with my reality.
Also, I'm just thinking, like, let's say that he did actually have a stroke, and the Prophet's dua actually caused a stroke, like God did it for that reason. I don't think they should even get rid of like, I don't think, let's say, even if that was true, I don't think like this outweighs all the other narrations of the Prophet's mercy and this compassion that we do know about. So if this happened, I think my question initially should not be, no, if I accept this, then that means the Prophet's a cruel oppressor or something. Instead, it should be, my first question initially, at least in the beginning, should be like, why would the Prophet ever do such a thing when I know, on the other hand, the things I have confirmed of his mercy, of his compassion, of the fact that he's brought this message that's saving me and saving me from this darkness I'm in. Like, why did such a Prophet do such a thing? It should be my initial approach. Instead of the intellect that such a thing is instantly just terrible. Like, I should be more open-minded, even if that was true. I don't know if it even is set that way.
I think for the last point, just to increase and maybe make more stark of an example, marriages of the messenger is a bigger example for that. Because if you look at it from that age's mindset of what marriage is and how people are avoiding marriage but not avoiding that sort of a relationship, and then this sort of a mindset likens himself to the messenger, and then think of those marriages or evaluates those marriages as the marriages of, or lack of marriages of himself, or how he takes the opposite gender as, and then evaluates messenger on this basis. So how shall I interpret? Shall I say that no, it cannot have happened like this, especially one of the very frequently cited marriage is with Aisha. So at that age, no, it cannot be that age, it has to be. Then we start to play with numbers just so that we make it more of an acceptable thing in the mindset of what we understand from marriage in this age. And thinking that messenger must be marrying this girl just because of some pleasures. But yet, if we accept that this is okay, that age, then it becomes pedophile, then we have to play with the numbers and make her of that age, and then this is what ends up happening. But rather, if I go with description, definition of who messenger is, and then see the big picture of him, and then come back and say that, well, under these circumstances, what a marriage is in the first place, so on and so forth. If I go and now restructure my looking at the marriage and his marriages as such, then things are going to be totally different. And last thing that I would like to say is, especially as we are interested in seeing wisdom behind things, which is a good thing. But, and this would be along the lines of what Muhammad Said was saying, let's say when messenger was doing the prayer, he was putting this kufi and then this whatever amana turban around his head. So what was the meaning behind that? Because, for example, I'm trying to give a meaning, load a meaning to the prayer, but also there are a lot of movements of prayer. Why do I do it like this? When messenger was doing, why did he do it like this and then do it like that? Well, the point is just to get connected with God. Just go and do yoga, man. I mean, the point is making the connection. Because if I cannot find a specific meaning in that movement, for instance, and since I am a man of wisdom, and I'm saying that to the same degree I have to find same convincing level, unless I do that or I reject it. If this is my perspective, for instance, then because now these matters are really, we are coming to, as he says, like the auxiliary detailed stuff. If you tie your hands like this or just leave them, messenger did multiples of them, but for instance, he never prayed upside down. Like there is some sort of boundaries that he did. He has chosen to do it either one of those 5 ways, let's say 6 ways, whatever, but among those 6 ways. So if my attitude becomes, if I don't see some convincing meaning or answer in that, then I'm not going to touch it. And as Muhammad Ali was saying in the example of inheritance, so if I don't see why it is not half-half, then I'm going to reject it. So what is it that I'm expecting to get as the strong level of certainty versus, because the author says some of them just requires, some matters requires lack of contradiction. If there's no contradiction in there, why not eat pork meat? So if, why pork but not cow? So if you say that, well, the creator just on the bare minimum wanted to let me know that I am the owner, not you. I decide what you eat, what you not eat. It's not that you can go freely and eat everything as if it belongs to you. And arbitrarily, the creator said, pork, don't eat this one. Cow, you can eat this. Perfectly satisfies this purpose. Might be further meanings which are right now unavailable to me, but this level of meaning is more than enough to tell me that, yeah, it makes perfect sense. But if I say that, no, I have to understand why this genetic sequence of animal, but not the other one. Unless I find this answer or this answer is provided to me, I will just go and eat. So I guess I'm then missing a huge point.
Real Birkan, please go ahead.
Thank you. So the part of the text which says secondary matters or particular events in time, which are not among the bases of belief, do not require certain compliance and definite proof, just not to be rejected and to be submitted. So this particular events in time part. So while Abdurrahman was giving his example, so I was asking to myself, like when I read such a narration, does it really matter whether the guy really had the stroke or not? Or the stroke was after Prophet said, or there were already signs that there will be stroke, whatever, it doesn't matter. So as author says, like a particular event in time. So taking the person who ate with the left hand as a historical person and figuring out his medical history. So I guess the reason, the way we started this third branch, third branch, because in the second branch we said, okay, there's a path which if you follow, that you will find the perfection. And this path is the path of Adam. So this is the best way that you can follow, which is the path of Prophet. And I'm trying to follow this path. So following this path is about guidance, getting guidance about myself. So let's say my child is not happy, and I'm not happy with my life. But why I have such a child? Why I have such friends? I'm not happy with my life. And this narration comes to me as a guidance, and I'm trying to benefit. I guess author here says, in such a case, would you really be concerned about the medical history of this guy, the historical person? Like why you are even concerned with that? Why you are even questioning this? What kind of guidance it can provide you? If you cannot get your guidance from this narration, then forget about this narration. It wouldn't help you. But if you're trying to get the guidance, read the narration as such. Read the narration, as author says, to get some basis of belief out of that. If you are reading narrations to, learn about what happened to people and so on, then you are lost. At least it wouldn't give you any guidance. So anyway, even with the particular events that we read or particulars, not punishment word. Yasak. Somebody help me, please. Prohibition, okay. Prohibition. Like when we read about them, we should read them as to get something about the basis of the belief. These parts will guide me. And the secondary parts, we should treat them in a different way, as author says. Just treat them as, what is the word he says? Just do not reject, or just submit it to them, whatever it means. He even says, like, not to be interfered with. Like, it's not your business whether the guy was, you know, wearing a shoes or sandal when this event happened. Do not interfere with them. Try to get your guidance of the narration.
Thank you for sharing that and for giving us the privilege to hear Bishra's voice as well. Always nice company. Do you have any other thoughts? Yes.
Just a quick thought about what Brother Bridkan said. Like when he says that, like just get your guidance from him. I'm just like, it just feels like if I ignore the person and the history, and then it's like, am I just loading a ton of meaning onto this? And I'm just trying to like find meaning that speaks to me. But then I like catch myself. I'm thinking, wait a second, doesn't everything that exists speak to me already? Isn't everything supposed to have some meaning for me? So it makes a lot of sense, or that the prophet, an event that happens with the prophet, would even have to have even more meaning for me. Like right now, just someone sitting next to me has meaning for me. If I'm able to read it, then something that the prophet has done, it should also speak to me in some way too, because it was also being created. So yeah, I just wanted to say, like, it shouldn't be absurd to, or I shouldn't be scared to like try to find meaning in such an event that looks to me, because even if it did happen in history, it is still being created and I'm still witnessing it, and he is still my prophet. So there's still a connection for me to see some speech from me.
Thank you. We have a very diverse crowd of participants today. Yeah. Okay. Any other comments? H. Beza, you got anything you want? Oh, there you go. I was thinking you were the only one that didn't say anything.
I was thinking about the story of Musa and Khidr, and the verses that revolve around that in the Quran, and how, I guess, like in my trying to understand or make sense of any sort of interpretation, again, as a fundamental step, I need to kind of ask myself, like, based on who or what am I drawing these judgments based on? Or what are the, like, based on what am I implying or assuming or drawing a certain understanding of something to be beneficial or harmful for me? So I think alongside many of the points that were made by Yusuf and Birkan and other participants as well, I have to, I guess, constantly refer back to, like, what is at stake for me, and how can I, or what is it that I am in need of, and how can I make sense of this within that which I need. And when I do try to interpret it or extract some sort of meaning out of it for myself, based on what sort of criteria am I extracting this meaning from, and this criteria itself I need to question as well, and not in like a mechanical sense, but I think the criteria for which I try to understand it determines or affects whether or not, like why am I even here approach or trying to make sense of this hadith anyway, or text anyway. But yeah, just wanted to share that.
Thank you. So I propose that if no one else has, I mean, thank you. That was very comprehensive for me, everyone's comments so far, and has really opened up the second principle. And I propose that if no one else has anything else to say, we can move on to the third principle, which is even shorter. Third principle, in the time of the companions of the Prophet, most of the Jewish and Christian scholars entered Islam, and their former knowledge became Muslim along with them. Some of their former knowledge, which was contrary to the truth, was imagined to be a part of Islam. So here, he's giving us a very clear historical citation, if you will. And initially I was thinking when he says their former knowledge became Muslim along with them, I was thinking that it must have sort of like an aspect of it that looks at truth must have been crystallized. But the last sentence is a little confusing because he says some of their former knowledge, which was contrary to the truth, was imagined to be a part of Islam. So this seems to give off a negative connotation in that there could be an adoption of certain tendencies or beliefs or ways of going about that are considered Islamic because of the identity of that person being Muslim. But if in this case they're carried along, although they are not part of Islam, then it's imagined to be a part of it. So, or maybe he's saying that part of the knowledge became Muslim, part of the knowledge became an imaginary part because it was contrary. I mean, it could be the case that parts of one's beliefs that are not contrary to one's reality can take an even more beautiful shape under certain guidance, can become Muslim in this sense. Whereas at the same time, there is, it can go in the other direction as well, in that when one starts to represent outwardly being an adherent of a certain worldview, their tendencies, beliefs, notions that don't necessarily align with that worldview can be imagined to be part of that worldview too by an outsider. I mean, this is what I'm making of the two sentences. So how do I relate this to myself? I mean, I think I try to be in a state of being where I enter Islam every single day or every single moment. Right? I try to realize the nature of my existence, what it means for me, what my actions mean, how I can connect them to my Creator, how my interactions with someone else help me see that. So I am constantly in this state of trying to enter Islam, or enter into this relationship with my sustainer, with my Rabb, with my guide. And I guess when I am in that sort of process, realizations I may have take on a different level or degree of meaning when I am able to connect them to their existential level, to what they point to in their existence. Yet on the contrary, it can also be the case that I may do the opposite. So that's my pitiful attempt to read this, at least. Any epiphanies? Yeah.
If I think about myself, my own journey to Islam, there certainly was a period where I was not practicing Islam as it should have been, or maybe as I am now. And so, but once I did start, following, the teachings and practices, at that point, I did have this whole, vast amount of whatever knowledge or way of seeing the world or living that had nothing to do with Islam, right? And so just suddenly making a decision and saying, okay, I'm gonna be a Muslim now and pray and stuff and believe this and that does not wipe away the lingering bits of my past life. And so I guess for me it's important to realize that and try to not take for granted everything that I believe in, every single belief that I have, because some of it might be from dubious backgrounds. And maybe the directive is to, be more certain, find ways to be more certain in what I do and believe in.
And going off of, I think Brother Yusuf actually touched on this. From what I understand here, like for example, let's say our education system or sciences of today could be what the Jewish and Christians of scholars of that day were, like the scientists of today. We learn about physics and all the laws and nature, and then with this kind of like groundwork, with this kind of foundation, we then, let's say we become Muslims, or like we enter Islam, and then we start interpreting or trying to understand the things within Islam based on such a foundation. Here they did it based on maybe Jewish and Christian history or something else. And when you do it with this way, interpret in such a way, and I'm guessing that's what he's saying here, is like they add interpretations to things which are faulty. Like if you try to reason about something using science as your foundation, as your groundwork, then it's going to end up being faulty. Like it's not going to be true. And back in that time, and here I'm just guessing, like that's what he's implying, is some of these narrations, they added things to do with, let's say, science of that time. And that's why, or such an interpretation would be faulty. But again, I don't know exactly what he's implying. But.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, I guess. What is it that within my, when we're talking about intellect and training the intellect, what is it that I'm adopting and bringing into the equation that being fully cognizant of? I'll just leave it there.
So in the third principle, actually, he's introducing his, the ordering is important to me in here. What he is right now saying in the third principle is being quoted as the first principle for many people. What do I mean by that? In the third one now he says, there are something out there in the narrations which are actually part of some scholars' knowledge, but those scholars were Christian or Jewish before they become Muslim at the time of Sahaba. Because what we see as narrations are what Sahaba heard from the messenger. So we are hearing point of view of a Sahaba of what Rasulullah said, or what stick with the mind of that person as Prophet ﷺ was speaking. So this is granted. And now the author says, when this person was speaking, this narrator, he was also saying something, but his knowledge, maybe to explain what he understood from the messenger, or when he was listening from the messenger, he connected it with some stories or narrations he read from Bible or Torah, and he said, oh, this is what he's talking about. Then when narrating it, maybe he worded it in a way that he remembers it from those previous scriptures. So actually now things are being a little bit mixed. Some of them is from messenger, some of them is from the narrator, and there's no ill will in here. This person's knowledge become Muslim with him, and he started looking at it as still it gives him some sort of guidance, like let's say details of stories of Jonah. Quran is just talking about it for a single verse, and then maybe messenger gave some details maybe of the message, Jonah. But then this narrator, who himself was a Jewish scholar before, he knows much, much more detailed story of Jonah from Torah. So when he is narrating it to people, it might have been that he put something from his own knowledge, which is contrary to truth. Like this thing didn't happen as such, but it was just the Torah was wrongly transmitted over time, so that's what that person knew at the time. But the author, the important part is, the author says, leave some room for that as well. I mean, commonly this is known as Israeliyat, maybe you heard this word. So among hadith, there are some things as such, which is coming from other traditions. And he says this is how it entered into narrations. But author is listing this in the third principle. This part is important to me. Because if he listed this in the first principle, then what would I do? I see some narration which seems to be problematic. I would say, oh, this is Israeliyat, kick it out. But in the first principle, he said, first and second principle, he is first saying that, first check yourself. You know what religion is? If something is not fitting with what you expect, it might be that you are missing the description of religion in the first place. Because religious teachings are not supposed to be, or there are going to be some room, as Birka was saying in the initial summary, there's going to be some room for your free will, meaning that it's not going to be as obvious to take your free will away from your hand, which means maybe this is why you first need to stop and check. In the second one, he said that there are different levels. Don't expect the same level of certainty from every matter. But now in the third one, he says, but also within the narrations, you will see such things. So open up some space for that as well. While you try to interpret them, you shouldn't be, because he says this is a reason that happened that's out there. It might be that everything you hear was not what Prophet himself uttered. Because this is narration at the end of the day, especially for hadith. It's a person's perspective. So take this also into account, but not to say that dismiss it altogether. Because this is generally, and he's going to give examples in the following pages. The author's attitude is to, as if, like when you define an equation in some data science, when you define some model, you put another constant over there or some variable to account for noise, saying that we also expect to have some sort of noise in the data, so let this take into account this noise. But still, we don't want to put all the data into trash because it's noisy. Still, we are trying to make something out of this data. And likewise, there is data being transmitted to us from the messenger, and there is some noise in the data. There is no denial of that. But don't start from focusing on the noise and saying that since it's noisy, let's throw it into trash. And the third principle focuses on this noise not being intentional or with ill will, let's put it this way.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I guess I expect Nursi to spoil us and just be very explicit. This is what I mean by this principle. Or else I go into these crazy metaphors of, well, I am entering a celebration. I mean, sure, you can read it that way too, but this makes a lot more sense in terms of the context of the subject matter. Now I'm starting to think that people are changing their names online so that they can just hear certain phrases, but Birkan the Great, please go ahead.
Thank you for calling me this, but I don't think I deserve this. But if people want to call me as it, okay, I will accept. I just want to highlight what Atik said. I think it was really important. So I don't want, just to remind myself again, that when I interact with anything, if it is it is the matters of Islam or something else, whenever I interact with something, I always impose my other previous beliefs, my previous experiences, and so on. This is very human. There's nothing wrong with this. Actually, this is the way to do it, like we should do it to some extent. Otherwise, we would, live with a blank mind every moment with no memory. But thanks to God, His mercy, we have this sense of memory. We have this sense of, previous understandings and so on. But the author also says that, Birkan, you are doing this when it comes to matters that are supposed to transform you, that are supposed to, take you from one point and to another point, that you become better, that you become cleaner, whatever. So check yourself whether you are imposing things that shouldn't be carried with you. As Atik said, that there are some worldviews, there are some experience of mine, there are some beliefs of mine that shouldn't be carried to this new experience. I should clean myself. So we do this a lot, as Abdurrahman said, partly from education system, maybe even bigger part goes to our cultures. Like we have certain things, certain way of looking religion, certain way of looking to scriptures, narrations, mostly coming from our cultures. We take it to, even to extremes, claim that, eating X or Y is a religious act, but not eating some other things is not religious act, like dates, for instance, hurma. If you eat hurma, this is religious. If you eat mango, no, this is not religious. Because I'm imposing some cultural context, cultural background. Or because I'm Turkish, every religious person should wear the things that we call as shalvar, like these loose pants. If you are not wearing them, you are not religious. Or if you have this kind of, facial attribute, you are religious. If you don't, you are not religious. When it comes to understand or interpret things, I do the same thing. So for instance, within the worldview I live right now, within the world I live right now, I feel as if I have to interpret things with a sort of feminism. Otherwise, I cannot look at my friend's face who is feminist. So if I read something like, Prophet got married at this age or whatever, I have to interpret, because I have to impose as if this worldview about the feminism into this narration. And because they don't agree to each other, I say there must be something wrong with this. Or sense of freedom as being taught to us, which is like nothing but a bogus sense of freedom. But we impose it all the time whenever it comes that the prophet or scripture tells us something to do or not to do. But what about the sense of freedom? Right? I'm imposing my worldview or previous knowledge, which is in contradiction with truth, which is that I need to be transformed. I need to be free. I need to be freed from my chains. This is my truth. But with this false sense of freedom, I try to interpret, I try to reshape these narrations in a way they will fit to the norms of today's world. How dare a prophet can cause a stroke to a man? A creator causes strokes every day, every moment, but still he's a merciful creator. Every stroke that we experience is caused by, even created, forget about causing, like it's still, there's a distance when we say cause, is being created moment by moment these veins are, blocked by our merciful Creator. But today's norm cannot let me accept such a thing. What mercy are you talking about? How a merciful Creator can create a stroke in a innocent old guy? An author here, I guess, saying that just like these men, like the old guys, Christians, Jewish, who imposed their previous understandings or their norms to this new knowledge, which is there, not as a, so that I can collect more information, but it's there to transform me, to change me. Whatever I think now, whatever I believe now, needs to be expanded, needs to be changed, needs to be replaced. This is what guidance means. That I cannot find my way with the current norms that I have, with the current knowledge that I have, and I need guidance. So I guess we do this a lot. We try to read, like when I say we, I mostly refer to myself. I try to understand things with the norms which are opposite the truth, like the false sense of freedom, a complete false sense of equality, a completely false sense of mercy. These needs to be changed, these needs to be replaced by the guidance I receive from narrations and the scripture. So do not impose your previous norms. That's what I understand.
Thank you. Become the great. Do we have, and I guess just to read comments out loud, real Donald Trump says, I fear this conversation will end up inviting us to wear bow ties. So, thank you. I don't have much else to add myself.
I'll be the third person to emphasize what Atik said after Brother Ridwan. Just this idea of, well, a long time ago at a retreat, Brother Faraz had like a presentation on like we confuse what good and bad is, or he was like diving into this, like the Quran. I think there's a verse that says, "Don't mix up good and bad," and then he was questioning like, what do I think that's good, which is actually bad, or what's bad? What do I think that's bad, which is actually good? And then so we have like these, basically we have like these preset notions that knowledge is good, or compassion is good, or something is good, and this is bad. And then we go and we read the Quran with that perspective, or we look at the Prophet's life, and then we say more than one marriage is bad. What's this Prophet doing? Or we say, what kind of God lets people in Africa starve? We have these preset notions that need to be reevaluated. Like we're taking these as like truths and then judging the Quran off it, or judging things with this, like as if this is like some truth, like deep truth that can't be questioned. But really, like these things that we have that we're building all our foundations on, like we need to like really look at them and see if we need to like clean them up, purify them, make sure that we don't have like this like Jewish or Christian knowledge, or let's say things that we've brought with us into Muslimness, which are contrary to the truth. So just my own emphasis, because I think it's a very important point.
Okay. So we have about 10-ish, a little bit more than 10 minutes. We can start reading the fourth principle. There are no protests. Okay, fourth principle. Some of the words of the narrators of Hadith, or the meanings they deduced, were considered to be part of the text of the Hadiths themselves. However, since man cannot be free of fault, some of their deductions or words which were contrary to the truth were supposed to be Hadiths and were pronounced to be weak. So this here is a principle that appeals to the layman mind like myself because it's just very explicitly about hadith. So I feel like this is almost like it's very perhaps similar to the third principle, but I guess here emphasizes the fact that, you know, because the human being can't be free of fault, there's the liability to error. When I narrate something, right, even deduce certain meaning from that which I narrate, it can get mixed into the narration itself, and aspects of that deduction or narration which look to my own fault can make that hadith look weak or be pronounced to be weak. So, I mean, it's a very explicit, fourth principle.
As I go about my day-to-day, you know, just trying to practice Islam best as I can, and with, you know, maybe not even just assuming a role, but maybe being perceived as a representative of Islam, you know, with my kufi on my head, of a obvious visual identifier. I feel partially guilty for doing Islam a disservice by assuming such a role, because I know that I am very well not free of fault.
Welcome to the club. I mean, there's billions of Jabbies out there, so.
Yeah, but I guess maybe this part is sort of a consolation. I guess maybe we're all a little, you know, we all have our blemishes, but we shouldn't be so complacent that we're not motivated to perhaps correct the parts of ourselves that we know to be blemishes.
Can you say that last part again?
So we all have blemishes on our characters, and we should feel a reassurance that, you know, that's not just us individually, but all of us as, you know, as humans, as being people. But we shouldn't let that, you know, make us complacent with our blemishes, and that we should still be motivated to correct ourselves in what we know to be faulty. And also, I guess, if we were looking at others or another's behavior or actions or speech, we should try to separate their own faults from what they might be representing, right? Not letting their personal faults get in the way of maybe some good that they have to say or offer.
Thank you. And, you know, like in my day-to-day life, everything is a messenger to me. In an explicit or implicit sense, right? My interaction with a baby, my interaction with this piece of technology, my interaction with other drivers in traffic, or just like a stone that I step on, all of those can be messengers for me if I look at them with the correct mindset or viewpoint. And especially, I guess, when it comes to human beings can be very explicit messengers. And so, as you're saying, I guess I'm just going to reiterate what you're saying. Join the bandwagon of that. Approaching speech, whatever kind of speech it may be, whether it's, you know, my professor, my advisor, family member, trying to look for the message there for me that speaks to me, that's being created for me, and amidst whatever else might be being said, I guess. Like, yeah, there might be error, there might be whatever, but there is something there for me. You know, there must be, because it's being created for me. It's part of my existential syllabus. You know, if there was no message for it, I would not be experiencing it. So I have to try and look for the message there. That's my take on it. So I guess, you know, in this sense as well, sure, I can be conscious of the fact that human beings make mistakes or can have errors and aspects that look to falsehood, but at the end of the day, if there's something being narrated, there is something there for me. There must be. Yeah.
So I guess this was, as you said, very similar to the third principle. I guess differing in the sense that there are also other narrators which are not coming from a Jewish or Christian background, like literally, but still their narrations are including their own understanding. And like very practically, think of it like, let's say Nursi. So, because if you know a little bit of Turkish history of Nursi's students, so they were like in an age in which Nursi was being exiled and everything. A bunch of people were around him, so very determined, very self-sacrificing people. So after Nursi's death, people just gathered around them and they tried to learn and understand what Nursi was saying and writing from them. And those people were, they were not scholars per se, but they were very determined and very sincere people. But eventually they become very like leaders, if you like, leaders of community. And, but definitely they had a certain understanding of Nursi's writings and they lived with him. So they have this first-hand experience of how the guy that spoke those words were living. So they have this other sense of observing a living example. So in this sense, they had some thing that I don't have access to. But then, let's say they're reading some part of this text and then giving an example. And actually, very interestingly, now we are studying third branch. In the second branch of this text, for example, a very famous example was given by one of those students of Nursi. And I mean, since now it is the matter, I'm going to narrate that example too. So that person, Sungur Abi, he asked, it was at the time of like Russia and America is trying to send people to space. So this was in the news and everything. So people are talking about this. So this Sungur goes and asks to Nursi, saying that, what do you think? They're saying that they're going to go to moon. What is that about? Nursi says, oh, my brother, I have written everything in my book. Don't ask me. That much. Then,
he said what? I have everything.
I have written in my book. Go and read my book, he says.
Okay.
And he doesn't answer. Then he says, after years, while reading the second branch, there he says, you climb to the moon, like I'll read it from here. So it's a little bit funny example for myself. So at the top of page 349. Now, wise philosopher who has entered into droplet, you have advanced as far as the moon with the telescope of your droplet of thought, and by the stairway of philosophy, you have entered the moon. Look, of itself the moon is dense and dark. It has neither light nor life. Your endeavor has all been in vain, and your knowledge has proved to be profitless. You can only be saved from the darkness of despair, the desolation of loneliness, and pestering of evil spirits, and the horrors of that bleakness through these conditions, so on and so. So when he was reading this part, once at some point, he said that in here, Nursi is talking about what the astronauts will face when they go to moon. And there were some like narrations saying that when they first went to the moon, they heard some voice, this and that, like legendary things, right? Yeah. And then this brother says that, see, Nursi has already said it. And back in Turkey, when we were studying this topic, and whenever that text is read, people were narrating this explanation of that brother, and in which you are taking the text now literally, rather than what
that highly symbolic text is trying to understand, we got stuck there and we never understood what the text was saying. And this person is not saying this with ill will or anything, but he understood it in this way. And to him, it confirmed some legends out there saying that, oh, they heard azan, they heard this, they saw some jinns on the moon or this and that, right? So, and he thinks that as if Nursi in here is mentioning that or was referring to that when he said, I have written it in my book. And it became, if you like, de facto way to understand this paragraph for some people. There's no ill will here. Every person has some deficiencies. I mean, for that person, because he himself was not a scholar. He was a very sincere and very determined person because his life was in jails as well, this person. But still, understanding that text was something else. He didn't understand that part of it. Maybe for some other parts he understood it better than others, might be, but not that part. But as it comes down, and since I am, taking this person very highly, and he was a person to be taken highly also, but in that sense, I needed to put a question mark and say that something seems to be fishy here. So this is what's happening. Like in the fourth principle, the author says this also could have happened and have happened with the narrators of hadith as well. They took something, for whatever reason, they appreciated it or they wanted to understand it as such, and they carried it down like this. Some people just took it exclusively like that and put it into narrations, but just be careful with that. It's not that, oh, how dare they do this, so since such a thing is out there, it's very dangerous, let's just put all of them out of the window. No. I mean, let's say in the case of the example that I gave about Nursi's student, how come that you narrate such a thing, so nothing that comes out of your mouth I'm going to pay attention to go away, you are doing disservice to this book or anything. No, this person truly did a lot of good service to spread of that message. So keeping this balance, I guess.
Certainly, reading. We have a hand raised here. B Chuk, you can go ahead.
Thank you. So I will again try to highlight and reiterate what Atik said. I guess it was again really important, beautiful. Thank you. So the way I understand this text is about the humility in general. So, for instance, the author doesn't say words of some narrators. It says some words of the narrators. I checked the Turkish version as well. It's at least the way I understand it same. Of course, it might be wrong. So author doesn't say, some narrators were not, that great. So they may confuse some words, or they may included some others. So he's not, I guess, talking about the levels of people. He's not saying that, there are some people who are not great scholars, be careful with them, but there are some great scholars like myself. You don't have to be careful. You can take every word we say. I don't think author is saying that. Author says this is like a generic truth, a generic notion of being human. We humans are not recording machines. When we listen things, when we look at things, even when we see them with our own eyes, we interpret them, we, shape them to some extent, and narrate them as such. Some of the words that we use, or some of the words that we use in our minds when we try to interpret things, should be questioned. So question yourself as well. When you try to interpret something, when you try to understand something, there will be some words in your mind that you use to explaining in what is in front of you, that some of them maybe need some questioning. So be careful with them. whether it's the lay person, the layest person, whether it's the best scholar ever, even with the prophet, like to the extent, even with the prophet, people were asking whether these are your words or the words from Revelation, right? And from the narrations, we know that it's really interesting. When I read this paragraph, it reminds me some narrations where when prophet, when he's receiving some narrations, he was moving his mouth, trying to repeat them so that he wouldn't forget. Because he's humble enough, he knows that he may forget and he doesn't want to forget. And the narration continues, God saying that we will, let you remember them. Don't try to memorize them. We will make you remember them. Because if it is left to your capabilities as a human, it won't work. We will do it. Also in Quran itself, there's a part, right? We will make you remember, and until we, wish, you will remember it. So anyway, I guess this is a generic text for the humility of any person. Let it be Nursi, let it be Yusuf, let it be Birkan, let it be anyone, even the prophet, when it comes to his own words. So I guess this humility, of course, like a first and foremost, it applies to ourselves. Like even with the things that in front of us, because these narrators, they saw the event, right? Or they experienced the event. Even something is in front of your eyes. Do not take your interpretations, do not take your ideas about what's going on as ultimate fact. Do not take them literally. Don't trust every word that you use in your mind to explain things. Question them. And I guess this is not something negative, by the way. I don't take the third and the fourth principle as author is trying to say that there is no way to reach truth. There is no way to reach, what is right, what is wrong. We are doomed. No, he says there are methods. This is what we are taught at universities, right? We know how to deal with noisy data. There are ways to reach what is right, what is wrong. There are ways to reach what is at the core of the narration. So just be serious. Don't be fooled with, every single word. So try to get the main message.
سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وآخر دعواهم الحمد لله رب العالمين.